Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this Thursday morning, East Coast time, and wherever you're joining us from any other part of the world, welcome. I'm so excited to be talking about the timeline for the new application cycle, and that's our topic for today. If you're joining us live, please just let us know where you're connecting from, so this way we know where our audience is joining from. So write it in the chat. And as usual, I will be talking about a given topic in relation to the MBA application journey. But before we dive into those details, just wanted to invite you to share this live with anyone in your network who is also considering business school, whether that you're joining us from our LinkedIn platform, our Facebook, our Instagram, or our YouTube channel. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel. We do have a lot of videos there covering a variety of different topics, so you can always watch replays on those. But in this live, you do have a chance to ask questions as I go through the presentation, and I would love to be able to answer those questions live. So please write along in whichever platform you're joining us. Know that so feel free to ask whatever question you have, and I'll be happy to answer those questions. So with that, why don't I'll put on the screen the slides that I put together for today's session. So we're going to be covering the MBA application timeline for the new cycle. I know that deadlines have not been released yet, or application questions, but we do anticipate a few schools releasing questions this May, and June and July. It's typically a lot of the schools will have, all the top 20 schools will have their questions released and deadlines also released. So this is a great time to take stock of what are the things that you need to do and start with your preparation to really have a strong output in your applications. So for those of you who don't know me, I am the founder of C Admissions, a boutique admission coaching firm focused on helping applicants tell their unique stories to top 20 business schools. I focus mostly on the narrative presentation, but there is also components that we don't typically talk about in the application, in the admission process that much. But there's elements around mindset, around motivation, and all sorts of different components that are part of the coaching world that oftentimes you don't know you need it until you go through the process, right? I have a 94% placement rate, which means 94% of my clients gain admission to at least one of their target institutions through the 9-step framework that I have actually on my website. So if you go to cadmissions.com, you can definitely see the framework with a few short videos associated with each part of the 9-step framework as well. So today we're going to talk about, I do have timelines on YouTube channel, so you can always go check those out. But this is really to talk a little bit more in depth around the timeline and how you need to prepare. And it's the full spectrum of the application process. I will be talking about the phases of the application journey because that is a really important thing to remember. It's not just to get to the submission, which I know everyone's main concern right now is that, which is normal, right? However, there is an entire process that you have to go through to get on the other side, get to the point where you are ready for that MBA, to start your MBA journey. So as we go through the different slides, please write your questions in the comments. Again, in whichever platform you're joining us, I'll be able to see the questions and I'll stop along the way. Actually, that's how we had our last week's session. I really enjoyed it. So hopefully I get to see some questions come through as well. So the phases of the MBA application, here you have 9 phases. In here, I do have a 9-step framework, somewhat correlated and orderly but this is essentially just recognizing what are the different phases that you need to be remembering as you go through the MBA application. So first and foremost, you already know the standardized test is a very important part of the process. One of the things that I sometimes hear applicants is, oh, I would like to get a waiver on my test. I'm able to get a waiver. I strongly discourage everyone to request a waiver unless there are some really unforeseen circumstances that impede you from taking the test, because the conversion is really difficult when you do not have a test in hand. And it's also very difficult for the admission team to really evaluate your quantitative capabilities without a test in hand. So really important for you to do this component. The application really starts with, depending if you're working with a coach, my phases start with getting to know your story, because I can't help you write goals if I don't know where you come from. So obviously with any coach that you work with, there is an element of discovery that happens before you start with your goals. But if you're going at it by yourself, you're going to start with your goals because you know your own story, right? So your goals are foundational pieces in the application process, because this is how you're going to, one, present your full accomplishments. You're going to talk about how your experiences lead you towards a future that you want to create for yourself. So, and also it's going to be impacting everything that you do in the MBA application journey. And we'll talk more about that as we go through it. School research is a very important component. And I don't mean just look at ranks and look at the school's website. When I talk about school research, I mean deep dives. I mean having conversations with people based on your goals, right? The people who have walked the journey you want to walk. Those are the kinds of people you want to have conversations with and understand how the schools are going to be able to support you in your vision. Is it possible, or if it's not possible? If it's not possible, then you really want to reassess your goals, right? So this is a really good time to stress test those goals that you put together in the conversations that you have with people. But take everything with a grain of salt, because if you speak with a student at your target institutions, they may not know your full story, and therefore may not be guiding you exactly as you should be guided in the process of putting together your unique application. Then it's the school selection, story strategy. And when I talk here about story strategy, this is really about the putting together the application story, right? So what is it? Who do you want the admission team to understand you to be? What are the values that you bring with you? What are the experiences that you're willing to share? So that's the story that I'm talking about here. And that's not just an essay story. It's across the board, right? So it's different pieces that you're sharing in your applications. Then we have the application material crafting. So this is going to be for every school you're applying to. Interview preparation, right? We're going to a new phase here: interview preparation, and then decision and scholarship negotiation, and then the final decision. Means you have to, when you show up, when you have all the decisions in hand, you have to let one school know that you are accepting their offer, and the other ones you have to let them go. And sometimes if you have offers from multiple schools and it's amazing schools, it's really tough decision to make. So let's talk about phase one, right? This is school agnostic, right? This means these are components that, irrespective of which school you're applying to, you have to go through, you have to put together. So at this point, you do want to start your preparation with your standardized test. I strongly encourage that you have this done 6 months in advance, at least, ideally a year in advance of your target deadline, just so that you don't have to stress about your test. Most of you, 99% of the applicants that apply, or at least that I see through, have full-time jobs. A lot of responsibilities, right? Some of them have extracurricular activities that they're engaged in. community service work that they're doing, taking the test and putting together an application. All of this comes with a toll, and obviously the more things that you have on your plate, output is going to be affected. So getting the test score in advance is always the best approach. Then we go with, your goals development. As I mentioned, goals development are the foundations for everything else. It's school agnostic, right? So it irrespective of which school you're applying to, in most scenarios, you're going to have a goal that is an MBA goal, and you should be developing that 6 to 9 months in advance of your target deadline, because it's a foundation for everything, all the conversations, all the work that you'll be doing. So having this earlier completed is obviously always better. The school research, as I mentioned earlier, this is something that you do not just in relation to finding the school based on the ranking that you find on the US News and World Report or any other kind of ranking systems that you're looking outside. This is really doing deep dives. As far as school research, also, you should be having conversations with students when they are on campus, when the activities are taking place. If you are applying to North American schools and you live in North America, I strongly encourage you to visit campus, and you want to do that when classes are in session, because that's when you get to experience what it's like to be on campus, right? So 5 to 6 months in advance, you want to do that. And then, of course, you want to build your resume. Like I said, the resume is agnostic. You do need to have a resume that is not a job resume. I was listening to some of the top-ranked school admission members talk about the resume in an MBA, and it's something that I've been sharing for so long, but it was also great to hear them talk about it as well, is that the MBA resume, it's different than the job resume, right? Typically, a job resume is going to have the responsibilities that they see. This is different, right? You want to really capture your accomplishment. You want to capture your achievements, the impact that you have made in the companies that you have been a part of, or in the communities you've been a part of. And the resume is at a glance first view that the admission committee has of who you are, and it really helps them frame the rest of the application. So a lot of attention needs to be placed in your resume. And I strongly suggest that you have it ready 4 to 5 months in advance of the target deadline, just so you have that component set. If someone in the process of your research asks you for your resume, you can always share that with them as well. And this is, of course, part of the framework. As far as when I work with applicants, we go through this process in extensive details in relation to making it an MBA resume and not a job resume. It's something that I would strongly suggest that you start working on it now, if you haven't done so already, or if you haven't started and you need multiple drafts. It's not something that you sit down once and you do it. It will have more than 4 drafts, typically, an MBA resume. We're going to move now to phase 2, and this is when you have major school selections, right? So this is school-specific components that you have to work on, right? So all the things that I mentioned in phase 1 can be done now before you start, before schools decide on the dates, decide on what the essay questions are going to be. And there's quite a bit of information that you need to, or a bit of material that you need to work through. Phase 2 is when you have now chosen the schools that you want to apply to. Obviously, you'll continue to have conversations with students, so you'll continue that discussion. And then you want to start working on your recommenders. Recommenders, you're going to need either 1 or 2, depending on the schools that you're applying to. Some schools have specific questions that they want the recommenders to answer, and other schools use the GMAC, Common Letter Recommendation questions. I have videos on my YouTube channel related to how to do that, so definitely feel free to watch those afterwards. So you want, one thing that I will say is when you choose a recommender, you want to not only make sure that you give them enough time, you also want to make sure that you're guiding them on what you want them to share, right? So if you're choosing a manager, well, that manager is probably also managing other people. And sometimes they may forget what are the things that you've accomplished. So a reminder of what you would want them to talk about, sharing your goals with them, it's going to be really important because they want to be your supporters. They're enthusiastically, hopefully, wanting to support your MBA application, and you want to guide them along the way. You want to do this at least 4 months in advance. And if you're providing them any kind of material, you want to do that, 1.5, 2 months in advance of the target deadline, because they have to sit down and write those letters of recommendation. And that's quite a bit of work on their part. Also recognize that if you're applying to round one, these individuals may have families, may have summer plans. You are relying on them to submit the letters of recommendation on time, right? So make sure that you give them ample time, you give them enough information that they need in order for them to submit a strong letter of support. School-specific components, when essay questions are released, that's when you start crafting your essay. One, you build an essay strategy, what stories you want to include, how you want to structure that. I always say that you want to have the strong foundation, macro level view with detailed action plan done first before you start crafting, because it may sound like, or may seem like it's a lot of work, but it's going to help you actually move faster if you have a strategy in place, if you have, an outline for yourself, just because once you have an outline, you see what the areas of work that you'll need to put through and add to the application, and it otherwise is going to be really difficult to write, scratch that, start a new draft, right? It's just going to take you much more time. So build a strategy in advance, and then obviously put an action plan for each of the schools. So most applicants are going to apply to 5 to 6 schools. Assume that you're going to have 2 essays per school. Each essay is going to need at least 4 drafts. Typically the first ones will need more than that. So if you apply to 5 to 6 schools, 2 essays per school, you do the math as far as how much work that is. You definitely want to give yourself a minimum of 3 months in advance of the deadline to put all of that into place, right? So whether you're applying in round 1 or round 2, obviously round 1, you have a little less time, so you really have to get materials done, all the rest of the materials done beforehand, so that you can focus on your essays when they come out. Another component that applicants don't put a lot of attention on is hello, sorry, I was just looking at some comments that I saw, notifications come through. Hello, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here. So let's continue. So one of the other components that applicants don't put a lot of attention on is the application portal content and the short answer questions. Some of the schools have short answer questions that have no word limitations, or some of them have short answer questions that have 500 words. That to me is an essay. It's not really a short answer question. And the application portal has an employment section where it asks you to write your job description and what your accomplishments have been. And typically applicants, I sometimes see this where they write see resume. Huge mistake. Admission committees at top business schools are putting together applications purposefully, right? If they wanted to see the resume, they wouldn't ask that question, right? So use the application portal as another area where you can really showcase who you are to the admission team. So really make sure that you are giving enough time for every component. And I would say 1 to 2 months in advance, you want to start working on the application portal and short answer questions, because you don't want an over-edited essay and an underdeveloped application, right? So everything needs to be equal we should receive equal love in the application. Some schools also have video essays, and when I work with clients, we typically do the preparation 3 to 5 weeks in advance for those essays, whether that's questions that we prepare in advance to answer through the Kira platform, like for example Kellogg, or at least last year's, that's how they had approached that component, or like MIT that has like a video recording. You do the scripts and all of that 3 weeks in advance, and then you do your recording so that you have time. When I work with clients, I'm looking at those videos just to make sure that the lighting, the background, there's no distractions, that there is a level of enthusiasm when they're answering questions. Because I know, if you're not used to speaking on the camera all the time, you're all of a sudden asked to stare at a camera and talk to someone, but there's no one there. So it's always difficult to make sure that there is a level of enthusiasm in those videos as well. And then, of course, the final details and review of the entire application. As you saw, even when you look at like when you should be working on the materials, you are typically working on pieces of the application. You're not working on all of it at the same time. It would be just too chaotic for you to do that. So I strongly encourage you to build your own timeline based on when you're applying and how much time you have from the time you start. What's important then, about 2 to 3 weeks in advance of the deadline, that you have everything mapped out, that you have everything written out, and 2 to 3 weeks in advance, you are going to look at your entire application before you submit. What you don't want is to have missed details, right? You wanted to share something about your past, but there was nowhere that you could share that. So how can you incorporate it? That's, giving yourself 2 to 3 weeks in advance of the deadline to do this part allows you to make tweaks without feeling like you're rushed, right? And you want to look at the whole thing, because you also want to ask yourself, what is the admission committee seeing when they read my entire application, right? If there are components that you don't feel that they're coming across in the application, well, the admission team will not see that. They won't be able to see your brilliance if you haven't shared it with them, right? Because the interview invites for most schools are by invitation only, which means not everyone is invited to interview. So you want to give them enough enticing, compelling details for them to be able to say, yes, I actually want to get to know this person more, right, through the interview process. So the final application review is not something you leave for last moment. You are going to want to do this as soon as 2 to 3 weeks in advance of the deadline. If you guys have any questions, this is a perfect time to write them in whichever platform you're joining us from. So if you're joining us from Instagram, write your question in the comment section, and I'll definitely be able to answer, as well as on LinkedIn or Facebook. Obviously, if you're joining us from YouTube as well, write your questions down. And if you want to know more about how I support clients through this 9-step framework, definitely go to my website, and you're able to watch short videos on each of the steps of the framework and how I approach those pieces. Excellent. So let's continue. Whoops, I went backwards. All right. So the application, by the way, just as a recap of what are the components that you need to put together and prepare. Obviously, the application, right? The application components, the short answer questions, all of those pieces. It's quite extensive, right? So you definitely want to give yourself ample time. Transcripts. Some schools require official, and other schools require or ask for unofficial transcripts. For the ones that require official, you do need to request it from your school. So you want to give yourself ample time, and obviously you want to know which schools do that. So do read the fine print on their website, on the application portal. Obviously, the resume for most schools, there's a 1-page resume. Typically, that's what you prepare for a full-time MBA program. Letters of recommendation, 1 or 2, depending on the school. GMAT, GRE, all top 20 schools ask for that or accept that. And some schools do have the option of the executive assessment. That's something that you may want to consider as well, if particularly the GMAT and the GRE are just a little bit too difficult or too time consuming for you. Just know that you are limiting yourself as to which schools you can apply to, recognizing that not every school accepts the executive assessment as part of their full-time MBA program. If you're an international applicant, there's a TOEFL or IELTS or a version of the English proficiency exam that you also have to plan out, and I would do that in conjunction when you are preparing your GMAT, GRE test, so that you are done with all the tests and sort of like set that aside and don't have to worry about it. So let's move to phase 3. So after you submit your applications, one of the components of my 9-step framework is that we start the interview preparation before you are invited to any schools, for interviews to any schools that you apply to. And the reason why I do that is typically applicants, when they work with me, they're working with me on some schools, not every school that they're applying to. And I still care enough for them that I want to see them succeed. So we start with the general MBA interview so that if they're invited to interview for the schools we're not working on together, they do have a baseline of what it means to show up in front of an MBA interviewer and what does that process looks like. Then, of course, we go with school-specific preparation. So typically, I start a week after they submit the deadlines. After they submit their application, we start with 3 sessions, 3 hours essentially of general MBA interview preparations. And that's just to make sure that you don't lose momentum and that you are really starting to think about the next phase. I do believe that at least the clients that I work with, they're strong candidates, that they will get an interview. And you have to work on the mindset if you think that you want to wait until afterwards. You should really question, why do you think that you would not be invited to interview? Right? So I know sometimes you're like, well, I haven't received an interview invite yet, so why should I sort of get myself excited about it? I totally get that element. However, when you're invited to interview, you have a maximum of 3-week window to complete your interview. And typically interviews for most of the schools come around the same time. I've had clients where we've had back-to-back interviews within a day of each other for each school, right? So we had to really map out this entire plan on how we're going to prepare school-specific questions with that framework in mind, right? So you don't want to, you are not doing yourself a favor if you are waiting to prepare for your interviews. So start early. And then, of course, you have school-specific interview preparation. There are some schools that will start sending out invites to interview. Like I've had clients who applied to Kellogg that received their interview invite, I think it was like 2 days after they submitted their application, even before they completed the Cura interview. Berkeley sends out interview invites on a rolling basis, and they start, I believe, 2 weeks before or 2 weeks after you submit the application, and it goes all the way until 2 weeks before the final decision. So yes, there is a range of when you can prepare, but you don't want to leave those components for last moment. Really get yourself ready. And then, of course, you want to prepare school-specific interview preparation that takes into account the nuances of how that given school that you're applying to approaches their interview. What are the typical questions? What are the approaches? How you make sure that you fully understand, reacquaint yourself with that school-specific details as to why did you choose to apply to that school to begin with? What are the resources it's going to provide? What are you going to give to them? What are you going to bring to the table? And then, of course, this is still part of phase 3, which is we may actually take a little bit of extra time today. So hopefully you guys are okay, but if not, you can always come back and rewatch this. The last part of the phase 3 is essentially navigating the decision. So when you have decisions, you are either rejected, waitlisted, or admitted. If you're waitlisted, you need a game plan. What are you going to do? You should not just accept the waitlist and not do anything. You are in the waitlist because you are a really strong candidate. They would want to admit you, but they don't have enough seats, right? And there's opportunities, or there's an element of the waitlist where the school felt that someone else was stronger than you, right? That means that you should take that time to really strengthen your profile. So you need an action plan there. If you're offered admission, well, if you're offered admission to multiple schools, how are you going to negotiate your scholarships? And you should negotiate scholarships even for schools like Wharton, for example, that it's notorious for not negotiating. That is components, all these components that you have to account for. If you're applying to round one, all of this is going to be going on from now until January, essentially, right? If you're applying to round two, it's going to start whenever you start the process all the way until April, right? So those are components of phase three. And typically with the clients that I work with, we're going through all of these pieces together. And then we have phase four. This is the pre-MBA preparation. I know not a lot of people think about this, and I know you're probably not thinking about it at this point, but it's something that you want to be mindful of. At this point, you have gone through a lot as far as putting together your applications. There's really a transformation that happens on an individual level as you go through this process. You are essentially seeing yourself from new lenses, seeing the value in what you bring to the table. It is an excellent time to really take stock of that, and then also look at, okay, are my goals that I have set out to do, are they still in alignment with what I want? Are they still in alignment with what I think would be what I would want from an MBA program, what I would want from my career? So reassess your goals is once you are admitted, once you've accepted a school's offer, you're going to want to reassess your goals, because it's going to form everything that's going to happen in the next 2, 3, 5 years from now, right? So you want to really spend time doing this. Then there is an element of the pre-MBA. So before you step foot on campus, what are the things that you should be doing to make sure that you're going to have a really successful start? Most applicants have been 5 years out of school, right? You need to reacclimate, and doing the elements appropriate for you and your goals will help you make sure that you are going to be successful. Irrespective of which round you apply, I guess, if you're applying to round 2 or 3, you're going to have a later start. But typically the pre-MBA action start preparation around February and stretch out until June. Typically July is when you move, and August is when you start orientations for most schools. And then there's an element in this phase where you are preparing the actions. What are you going to do when you are in an MBA program? You should not go without a plan. There is a lot of activity that happens, a lot of really cool things that are going on and everyone is talking about. You can choose to be involved in all of those things, of course, but if you are anchored on your goals, you can discern what you are engaged in and where you put your energy, where you put your efforts. Because if you are everywhere and nowhere at the same time, it's not going to be the best ROI for your MBA journey. And of course, it's going to impact recruitment. It's going to impact like everything that you are involved in. So going in prepared is really, really important. And that is part of the phase 4, which is, the pre-MBA preparation. And that is something that I go through with clients I work with. Okay, so that's the presentation. Sorry, I got a little bit overzealous in thinking that I can cover a lot more than I can in the 30-minute session. But I would love to see if there's any questions that have come through. I know they came, a couple of questions came in our registration form, so maybe we can go through 1 or 2 of those and just wait for a few questions to come through. Otherwise, we can end the session. All right. Okay, so the first question, I'm going to go with a question that came through the registration. How much time should I allocate to drafting and revising my application essays? I would say essentially you want to have at least 3 months in doing that, in doing the work there, especially if you're applying to 5 to 6 schools. You absolutely want to give yourself that much time. As I mentioned earlier, if you're applying to 5 to 6 schools and each school has about 2 essays, each essay is going to have about 4 drafts. do the math on how many drafts you need. I know that can be overwhelming to think about it, but it's the reality of what it's like to go through the MBA application process. And it's not to discourage you or anything like that, or to tell you to apply to less schools. It's really just to set the stage of what it's expected of you to work on, and just, one step at a time, make a plan of action, make sure that you are not leaving anything to chance, you're not pushing anything to later. It's all doable for round one if you once the essay are released. So absolutely. And one last question. Oh, I lost that. Okay, what's the best way to manage the suggested application timeline, as it can be overwhelming sometimes? It is absolutely overwhelming. And I would say make sure that you are looking at every single week, what's your workload like, right? Make sure that you have every single week a lot of time for the application, and you make that a recurring, right, in your calendar. Treat it as an appointment, as you would if you had a meeting with your boss, as if you would if you had a meeting with whoever is important to you. Treat it in the same exact way. And then for the week, you decide, okay, what are the phases? Which phase am I in? What are the things that I need to work on? And then use that a lot of time to work on that thing. Or those things, multiple items that you are working through. But definitely make sure that you are, or I strongly suggest that you are consistently working on material, because it's going to help with anxiety that happens, and it happens all the time for everyone. And it's also going to help you with making sure that you are delivering the quality that you want, and it's capturing who you are, the amazing candidate that you are in the application process. So absolutely treat it as, just like you study for the GMAT or the GRE every single day, or whatever your cadence is, you are putting in effort for that. Don't leave the application for last minute. Well, thank you so much. I see that we still have people online. Thank you so much for staying later than our usual session. And I invite you to reach out for a consultation with me to see how my 9-step framework can help you in the process. And I have it as a framework. It's really a framework. Everyone that I work with is an individual, and I treat everyone as such. It's an individual process at the same time, but you do need guidance. You would work with a coach because you need someone to handhold you through the process, and that's what I'm here to support with. So reach out for a free consultation. We spend 30 minutes talking about essentially you and what is it that you need, and then we go from there and see if it's a good energy. So there's no obligation in our consultation calls. Excellent. So I will see you next week. Next week, we're going to talk about what MBA admission committees are looking for in 2024. So you want to register for that event, there is a link on the screen. Also, if you go to our website, events-calendar. Yes, sorry, just a momentary, moment of forgetting what's the slug. We have a lot of events happening in the month of May, so register for next week's event, as well as any other event that you find that resonates with you and what your needs are. So thank you again, and I look forward to seeing you next week.